Okay. Once again, I want to officially welcome you to our What Cybersecurity Training or Cybersecurity Webinar, however you want to call it. And of course, if this is your first time that you're coming across me or coming across any of my teachings or coming across any of my video, I actually want to welcome you. And so today we are not going to really be doing anything so technical. But again, the goal of today's presentation, if I have to call it that way, is to explore some of the questions which I have had in the past from different students that I've had to taught or that I've taught in the past and I've mentored also in the past. So again, cybersecurity is a new field. I don't know if I should say it's a new field, but it is a field that a lot of people, especially those that are trying to begin a career, they feel and they think that, hey, that is a very fertile ground for me to actually start my career. But you see, the challenge is that most people who aspire to begin a career in cybersecurity, they don't even know where they are going to. So, of course, they are just at the mercy of all the voices that they hear outside there about cybersecurity. Now, sometimes it is very common for people to choose a career track in cybersecurity based on the different voices of orientation that they get. And they don't finally fully understand exactly what it takes to begin a career in cybersecurity. But today, we are not really going to be talking on how to specialize in cybersecurity, but one of my major goals for today's training or presentation is to be able to answer a common question which I have faced in the past with so many of my students. Again, it's very common when I teach maybe in the university or maybe community colleges to hear a lot of students ask the question, uh, where do I work in cybersecurity? I've been looking for a job for so long, but again, it's so difficult to get a job in cybersecurity. And if you ask the question, of course, to most students or some students, that what do you plan to do after you graduate from college? Well, some of them who are even more conscious than others, they are going to tell you that when I graduate from college, I am going to be working as a SOC analyst and so on. Now, you see, this is where the problem begins because sometimes most of our academia, of course, is not to look down on any academic setting or whatever. But sometimes you see curriculums are not designed in a way that it helps students to give them orientation as to what they will have to do after they get their degree. And of course, sometimes it is okay. You will hear school says, well, we have the Department of we have a department that can help you with your resume and so on. They offer guidance and so many things. But you see, that does not, according to me, solve the problem that a lot of people are facing, especially students and graduates who are in college or who are in the university. And when you hear most of them talk, as I mentioned earlier on, one of the things they are going to tell you is, hey, when I finish graduating in my graduation, I am thinking to start a SOC career or to start my entry into cybersecurity through SOC, Security Operation Center Analyst. And of course, it's a very good and powerful thinking. And that thinking is just because by the moment that you finish graduating from school, you must have learned so many technology or so many courses that at the end of the day, you don't even know what to do. It's very common for you to, again, be saturated with a lot of certifications. Maybe you go through one CompTIA certification or the other, you go through one ethical hacking certification or the other, or you go through one how can I call it, Linux operating system. You learn about the Linux operating system, which of course is good. I mean, those knowledge or that knowledge is going to build a very solid foundation for you to aspire to get into cybersecurity. But one of the things that most students or some students don't see is that the pedagogy, the knowledge that they get within school or just taught in those tools to go in for the exam, again, needs to be translated into the real world and so on. So again, I know it's a very common struggle right there. And again, it takes knowledge for those of you going through this struggle as I'm talking about to get you to the right direction or to the right path. But again, cybersecurity is broad and it might sometimes be very difficult to tell somebody that, hey, this is the best path for you to follow because people are different. There are some people who are technical and there are some people who are more or business focus. But the good thing about technology, people from different background and people from different mindset, they can actually take part in cybersecurity. And of course, again, if you come from a business background, you come to cybersecurity, there is always a job that is going to accept you if only you add some technical and some technology value to your knowledge. And so, what I'm going to be sharing with you today is going to be one of these areas in cybersecurity that a lot of people overlook. And when they overlook this field, is just because they have not had a lot of exposure right there. And we are going to be talking about identity and access management engineer job market. Of course, I want us to look into identity and access management and how that can be a very profitable and that can be a good field of specialization for somebody that is listening to me right now. So again, I'm sure some of you must have come across the word identity and access management, and that might actually be when you're preparing for certification, maybe CompTIA related certification or security plus. Well, you may have memorized it, just thinking that, well, it's something that I just need to know and go and pass my exam. But no, if you have the mindset, I have come to debunk that mindset because there's a lot of things that you can take through this. I mean, you can specialize your career just as an identity and access management professional. And if you look at the concept of zero trust architecture, especially CISA zero trust architecture, one of the things that you will realize is that one of the major pillar of zero trust architecture is IAM, Identity and Access Management Engineer. So again, Identity and Access Management Engineer is very, very broad. And I hope that by the moment we go through this presentation, at least it's going to open your mind, it's going to enlighten you, it's going to help you make that right decision that you are trying to make right now. Okay, now let's talk about the explosive market growth, industry trajectory. And again, this is just a probability pulled from the internet, okay? Don't take my word for it. I just had to get information from the internet. Well, but it is actually estimated that by the year 2028, this market, the IAM market, Identity and Access Management Engineer, uh, jobs on market is going to be projected above 34 billion and so on. So again, we are not talking about the entire cybersecurity. We are just talking about a fraction out of it where you can actually specialize yourself. And so the projected growth is about what? More than 34 billion by 2028. And so if you listen to this video, I don't know whenever you're going to listen to this video, this is actually January, I think 29, 2026. Of course, so which means that we still have a solid good years ahead of us. So again, if you are preparing to specialize in this area, then the market is actually very, very lucrative right there. So again, this is happening because of the digital transformation that is accelerating demand right now. We have cloud migration, expanding identity perimeter, and so on. We have remote work, is also driving authentication needs. We have zero trust adoption that is actually reshaping the landscape of security. And of course, the major thing I want you to take right here is that among the other fields of cybersecurity or information security, then one of those major areas that you need to put in your mind is the area of identity and access management. And of course, let's talk about what is driving the demand for identity and access management. That is a question that we really, really need to actually have that in our mind. First of all, the demand for identity and access management engineer is not optional. Other parts of cybersecurity can be optional. For example, if you are working for the government, you might be more focused on risk management framework. You might be dealing with FISMA. You might be dealing with things like FedRAM, just to name a very few, right? Depending exactly which part of the government you are working with. But now listen carefully. Those are just compliance that are related to those particular areas. Now, you can have a company that has nothing to do with FedRAM. You can have a company that has nothing to do with FISMA, but they have other cybersecurity framework that they are following right there. And of course, you might be in a country whereby they don't use this as their standard, they don't use FedRAM, and so on. So again, you see that again, that is just simply what those companies are. They have their own mindset about cybersecurity. But at this particular juncture here, you see that one of the things that they cannot deny is that those companies they need a form of authentication mechanism. That is the absolute and gospel truth right there. There is no way you are going to dispute this, right? Because even some of us right now, if you look at your phone has double or triple security features right there. Why? Because again, that has been wired already in our mindset. Immediately you buy a phone, the first thing that you have to do is you set a password on it. And so that is the same thing that happens in so many organizations today. Organizations may not follow the same compliance, but again, those organizations, they must have a form of authentication, identification, authentication in order to protect their, of course, resources. But now we begin to see that again, what is driving the IAM market, which is going to skyrocket, is just simply what I call compliance based, because different companies or different nations, they have different compliances that will require them to be able to apply a specific measure to be able to protect their data or their infrastructure. For example, I cited zero trust architecture, and I said one of the major pillar of zero trust architecture is identity and access management. And of course, again, it is something that you cannot deny because that is, again, going to be uh, one of the gold mine of cybersecurity. Now, let's talk about threats right here, because threat is actually one of those things that, again, a lot of cybersecurity professionals fear. Now, their nightmare is not to get up one day and they cannot access their information. And of course, the reason why security exists is because there is a threat out there, right? There is a threat out there. Anything can happen. We have bad actors out there. We have hackers of different categories out there that are always trying to get access to our resources, our computers, our network, or you can just think about any data that you have out there that is so precious that the bad guys are after. But now you see the fear of these threats, therefore, has therefore given the mindset whereby the first thing we need to do in security is also to identify a form of identity in order to protect ourselves, our companies. But you see, and one of those things that hackers they have understood the language is the concept of identity theft. So again, if you live in the United States, you will see that one of the crimes that are really, really uh, major is that we have what we call identity theft. Identity theft can be also brought again, but you see, if they can steal your identity, if they can steal your credentials, then they'll be able to bypass a certain level of security. And that level of security is nothing else but what I call a form of what authentication, right? So again, now you see that I am identity and access management is the first gate of security that you can think about it. Again, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It doesn't matter whether you have any cybersecurity framework you are following or not, but that is the first thing right there to be able to fight or to stop any form of threats. Now, I mentioned the concept of zero trust. Again, zero trust is actually the golden standard of security nowadays. As a matter of fact, when sometimes I get asked, how can I know or what are the skills that I need to study or I need to know in order to be very successful in cybersecurity? Well, the question here is very complex, right? So one of the ways I always go about it, I'm just going to say, okay, let's look at what a zero trust is all about. We are going to look at the different pillars of zero trust. We are going to look at identity and access management. We are going to look at application security. We are going to look at network segmentation or microservices. We are going to look at continuous monitoring. We are going to see things like device management and so on, right? So again, that is just a simple way to measure yourself if you are getting the right skills for the right job that you are actually aiming at. Because again, this is a framework that you cannot do without, whether you are working for a government organization or you are trying to work for a private organization, this is the golden standard that at one point you are going to be following. So again, there are so many things that is behind driving demand. Cyber criminals are there. There are many compliances, cyber security compliances that mandates companies to be able to, of course, apply those policies to apply a zero trust architecture or identity and access management. And some companies or some policies or memo, whatever you may call it, even go ahead to even specify exactly what type of authentication mechanism that meets a certain requirement and so on, risk tolerance and authorization before it can be accepted and so on. So again, knowing that identity and access management is the standard, it's not negotiable, whether you like it or not. That is one of those areas. Now, identity and access management, as I said, if you may have encountered such a word when you are preparing for your Security Plus from CompTIA or from any other certification, don't just take it for granted. Yes, I know sometimes, again, when you are preparing for your certification, it is very common for you just to recite some of those terms, memorize them because you want to go and pass and get a certification. If you're one of such people, congratulations, bravo. But now let's understand the different job titles that you can put on or that you can have or you can inherit uh, in this when you want to specialize in identity and access management engineer. Now, first of all, uh, the generic title can just be I am engineer, right? I am engineer. So when we talk about identity and access management engineer right here, this is somebody that has a broad skills range of technology that can be used to manage things, identities, and of course the way they gain access and so on. So in most cases, it might be a relationship or it will be a relationship between your identity store and again your service provider because you are going to be like in between. You need to understand that concept very well. And on the other hand, again, you understand how the HR system works in what they call the joiner, the mover, the lever solution right there. So again, an identity and access management engineer is somebody that has a lot of skills that he can actually use to implement and control identity and so on. So, but again, let's consider that identity and access management engineer right here is just a blanket word, and as we progress, then we are going to see how we can actually break it into pieces. Now, let's talk about the next title that you might find is what they call PAM engineer, password access management here, or privilege access management engineer. Okay, now you see one of the greatest problem that we have in cybersecurity today is and how to manage your credentials, right? How and where to manage your credentials. So again, you should be able to understand and have a very good mastery of what a privileged access management solution is all about. And there are so many of them out there. CyberArk is one of them leading the market. We have HashiCorp, HashiCorp Vault, we have AWS, we have things like, again, parameter store. If there are so many of them out there, there are so many of them. So again, you should be very familiar also with this technology right here. So on the other hand, again, we have I am security engineer, which of course security comes first. If you are just I am security engineer, then security becomes absolutely the hat that you need to wear at all time. Even though, again, being a security engineer and just a generic I am engineer, there is no too much differences because all of you have to think like a security person. But again, these are possible titles that you might find out there in the market. So the next one, we're going to talk about a CM engineer, customer identity focus, and so on. And of course, I'm going to talk again more on the issue of cloud identity and access management engineer. Now, again, there is no way you are going to excel in this particular job market if you aspire to be an identity and access management engineer, if truly you don't understand what cloud is all about. Now, gone are those days where everything used to be deployed just on-prem. Now, is it that, again, we no longer have companies that have resources on-prem? We have so many companies that have resources on-prem. For example, they may have legacy systems that cannot be migrated into the cloud. But nonetheless, most applications today are built to be cloud compatible or they can be migrated to actually live in the cloud. And when you are talking about cloud security, which is a whole big domain of its own, one of those major features that you see or you come across is what I call identity and access management. And identity and access management, if you are looking at it from major cloud providers such as AWS, you're going to see that it becomes like a global security right there, which is not bound by a specific region and so on. So again, for you to even be successful as a cloud security engineer, remember that even if you carry the hat of a cloud security engineer, you can still be focused on cloud identity engineer. So, but if you have to be focused on cloud identity engineer, you have to first of all understand the whole ecosystem of an identity engineering system right there. And if you have to be focused in the cloud, again, there are different things you have to understand. You need to understand how it works. You need to understand the concepts of users. You need to understand the concepts of groups. You need to understand the concepts of how policies are used in order to manage resources, access, and so on. You need to understand things like, of course, single sign-on. And most importantly, you need to understand a concept such as infrastructure as a code. Because again, it becomes very, very challenging if you think that you can always manage resources manually by creating one-on-one resources or users. It's always going to be somehow very, very much challenging. You might work there for, or you might be facing a situation whereby you'll be forced to be able to use an infrastructure as a code solution, in preference Terraform, which is agnostic, to be able to deploy most of your identities and manage some of your identities right there. But again, this is another subject of its own right there. And we also have what I call the identity and access management architect, who is, of course, a strategic designer and planner when it comes to implementing identity and access management right there. So again, the market is big and the job titles are very, very broad right there. So again, coming again to talk about the salary expectation, and that was as from again 2024, the entry level was 85,000 to almost 110,000, of course, a year, and the mid-career level was 115,000 a year, and of course 50,000 a year. For senior level, again, you can aspire or look towards 150,000 and more. So again, that was as of 2024. But again, things are changing. And as we saw previously, the market is actually going to be bright. So again, we have a glorious, if I may put that word glorious, or we have um, a brighter market ahead for those that want to specialize in identity and access and management. So again, what are some of the core skills that are required, which I know that I already fast forwarded the pace and mentioned some of them under cloud identity and access management? Well, one of the things that you need to understand is the concept of authentication. What are some of the identity protocols and standards that work behind the scene? Now, this again will make more sense sometimes when you are configuring, for example, a single sign-on, whereby there has to be an exchange or key exchange, or there's going to be the handshake, if I will put it this way, between the identity provider and, of course, the resource provider on the other hand. There must be some metadata that is going to actually exchange hand and so on. So we always have, again, things like auth, maybe 2.0, maybe future by the moment you are listening to this recording. It might be auth, again, 2 point something or higher. I will also have open ID or connect and so on. So this is where your expertise of different forms of authentication or identification technology comes in. We have what they call the security accession markup language, which of course, again, is a very important protocol, especially when we are talking about the exchange of metadata between an identity provider and a service provider. We have what they call the cross-domain identity management. We have things like the LDAP Active Directory. Of course, in this case, therefore, people like or companies or cloud providers like Azure Active Directory, they actually again, I don't want to say they're leaders, but of course they are really, really well known for their robust security, especially Entra ID, because among the cloud providers, in my opinion, this is my opinion, I think that they are leading in that area as a cloud service provider, and more precisely in the space of identity and access management. So on. We have Okta. Okta also is one of those giant and leaders right there. And of course, we say cloud agnostic because if you are dealing with the management and the deployment of multi-cloud, and you need a centralized authentication or identity store, then Okta can actually serve as, of course, one of the best option for you to choose. We have Ping, we have ForgeRock, just to name a few. We also have things like the FIDO, web authentication, and so on, passwordless authentication, which of course is the future to come. So again, these are some of the technology that you need to arm yourself with if you are preparing for a career in this area of identity and access management. Now, again, I mentioned already some of these major providers. We have things like major providers in the identity and access management space. We have people like the Okta. Okta is very, very good. As a matter of fact, you can just be an Okta engineer. While many people are rushing to get Security Plus, to get all the IT certifications, you can just focus and be an Okta Identity and Access Management engineer. That is very, very much possible. I know there are about 50 or more than 50 certification in IT. So again, if you are thinking that I need to get all those certification before I feel confident that I am strong enough for me to start looking for a job, then I mean you are wasting your time. Because the more certification you have, the more money you spend even to maintain those certification. But again, coming back to major identity and access management platform, we are going to talk about Okta. And Okta, again, I believe should be the leader so far. I'm sure if you look at Gartner's classification, Okta should also be one of the leader or the leader right now. We also have SailPoint, we have Savint, we have ForceRock, Ping Identity, and of course, Microsoft Entra ID. So, and among the cloud providers, we have people like Amazon or AWS IAM, which of course is also uh, good in the space of identity and access management, but again, designed purposely to manage AWS workload or resources or application. We have things like Azure. As I said, Azure is one of the major cloud leaders. Remember that when you are talking about clouds or the different cloud platforms, especially among the three leaders, Amazon, Azure, and GCP, each and every one has its own strength. Again, AWS, yes, dominates the market. They have a lot of different services, a lot of products, and so on that meet the demand of different vendors or different companies right there. But again, on the other hand, Azure is also having its own strength. And one of the major strengths of Azure, which other cloud providers can't even compete, has to do with their Entra ID. And on the other hand, GCP also its strength deals a lot with Google Analytics and so on. Well, again, that is just subjective. You might have a contrary opinion, but do your research. And I hope that at least my subjective opinion has contributed something to the way you think as well, right? Okay, let's move on. So, among some of the skills that you need to have as an identity and access management engineer, again, understanding programming languages like Python is also important. Again, Python is just one of them. There are so many programming languages, whichever one you feel comfortable or learn is very much important. Again, the use of PowerShell, Bash, and so on, JavaScript, Terraform. Again, this I will emphasize over and over and over because you work for an organization that has to provision so many users. Terraform becomes one of those ways for you to go. Because again, whether Terraform or cloud formation, it depends exactly on which cloud we are working on. So that is why I prefer to say cloud formation. So now you begin to see that if all what you knew about identity and access management engineer is just simply the concept that you studied in Security Plus or in your certification, then you never had all the whole picture. You were just introduced just to the intro, but there is still much for you to learn right there. And other skills include things like REST API. Okay. So again, these are just some of those skills right here that you need to have under your belt. And take note that some of these skills, again, you don't just get them within a day. They actually take time before you can really learn and master most of these skills. Now, security and infrastructure foundation. Of course, zero trust becomes your weapon. You must actually have that security mindset that works on the principle of zero trust architecture. You must also have a very good understanding of what they call multi-factor authentication. And this is where you see, again, going through fundamentals of security, such as Security Plus does a very good job because it introduces you to all this security concept right here. Multi-factor authentication is a must go nowadays. Okay. But I hope when we talk about multi-factor authentication, you will understand and bear with me that, hey, multi-factor authentication is having, or two-factor authentication is having two different ways of authentication right there, whereby your identity must be proven and before you are even authenticated in any environment right there. So multi-factor authentication is very important. And don't forget that when you are working on multi-factor authentication, there are different types. Again, there are some that are physical devices and some that are just virtual. It might just be an app that you can use again to authenticate yourself. But again, multi-factor authentication is just broad. And again, if you are dealing with some companies, if you are dealing with a specific requirement or security requirement, you have to also understand that most of this authentication mechanism, sometimes they have to go through a clearance or they have to be validated somehow through a specific program. So in case, for example, if you are trying to be FedRAMP compliant, then the authentication that you have to use also must actually be FedRAMP authorized or whatever be the case. So again, these are some of the things that as you begin to build a strong ecosystem or mindset to become exactly an identity and access management engineer, you will have to understand all these things. So, of course, you understand its implementation, which is very, very much important. Secret management, as I mentioned earlier on, is one of the things that a lot of companies struggle with. And again, you admit with me that the weakest form of security is usually the use of passwords. Sometimes it's very common for you to see in companies where people have so many, or employees have a different password, and sometimes they're just overwhelmed, password fatigue. They want to write them somewhere, pieces of paper. They want to stick them under the desk, and sometimes they write them at the end. They might put them in the trash accidentally, and so on. And you never know who is going to pick them, right? Them start diving right there. So again, they need to be able to manage company secrets. Now, remember, we're talking about secrets right here is very broad. It can still refer to your password. It can still refer to your API keys, or key API keys, or it can still be certificates and so on. But again, secrets again is very, very broad and needs to be categorized as well. But again, understand the concept of secret management. So, what are the best tools that can be used to manage secrets? I mean, some things like the PAM solution, maybe CyberArk that you want to use, maybe HashiCorp vault that you want to use. Maybe you want to use things like AWS, maybe Secret Manager, Parameter Store. I mean, there are so many of them. I mean, it doesn't matter which part of cybersecurity you will be in, whether you are a developer, whether you are just information system security officer, or whatever the position that you will be. But again, your secret must be managed, right? In some cases, working with government organization, of course, that is why you see they even have a very complex form of authentication right there. So again, secret management is one of those things that you will need to learn, and you need to have those skills. And those skills don't come in a day. You actually learn them as you grow in the profession. And another area here is we're talking about containers. Of course, containers play a very important role right here. Yes, you might say, oh, I want to focus on identity and access management. Of course, it is good you are trying to focus right there, but you also need to understand how things like containers actually work. You need to understand how those containers can actually be secured from the moment a base image is being used to build a container until when it is being shipped, or when it goes into the container registry and so on. So you need to understand all those stuff, right? You might think that, hey, I don't need security at this level, but remember that even those registries that you have to keep these container images right there, they also require a form of authentication, because again, you don't just allow anybody to go in there or to have access and so on. So again, it's a lot of security concept that we can talk about this, but that is also related to the concept of identity and access management. And again, you need to also have very good communication and collaboration skills that you can use right here. Soft skills also are just as important as technical skills. Don't make the mistake to feel that, hey, those that are more technical are those that make the money in IT. No, it's not always the case, right? You will see that what I'm saying here makes a lot of sense because some of you listening to me, you might be working under a manager who is not even as technical as you, but that manager is making almost twice of what you're making. And you have the technical skills, but again, you don't even match him or her in terms of salary. So don't always think that, hey, what the more technical I am, the more I am going to be valued in the market. Yes, technical skills are good, but non-technical skills also are very, very important because most stakeholders, believe me, they don't understand your technical jargon. All what they understand is business, business, business. So again, that is when non-technical skills comes in for you to be able to translate those technical stuff into less technical stuff for them to be able to understand. So again, business acumen, we talk about understanding compliance requirement, cost optimization strategies, return on investment, justification skills, and so on. So again, having that mindset of technical and non-technical is going to be a bonus, is going to be plus. Analytical skills. Again, sometimes you may think that you only need analytical skills to work in the SOC. Well, not obviously. You need those analytical skills to be able to work in other areas of cybersecurity, right? Again, like risk assessment capabilities. Of course, just imagine that you are working with developers who want to build an application right there. And you are working the team as a DevSecOps engineer. So, what are you going to do? So, again, you have to do what I call the risk assessment at one point, or again, a threat assessment, and so on. So, you will see that again, your skills to be able to analyze and understand those concepts, threat modelings, and of course, understand where the architecture is weak and what type of authentication mechanism can obfuscate the bad actors or the bad guys becomes very, very necessary right here. So again, having the concept of risk assessment is just very, very indispensable also. Incident response readiness, continuous improvement mindset is also one of those areas. So again, there are so many things we can talk about right here when it comes to the issue of identity and access and management and so on. And this section, I'm just going to flip through it quickly because these are some of those things that you must have come across it, or you listening to me right now, you already know them. Things like, of course, authentication trend, which biometrics is what we use all the time. Most people nowadays do have a phone, and either they have a password or they can actually unlock their phone using their fingerprints or facial recognition, right? We have what they call security keys, hardware based authentication, and so on. Decentralized identity. We have what they call self a sovereign identity standard, just to mention a few. Again, these are a lot of concepts right here, but again, you do not need to know all of them. You don't need to know all of them, but at least having a mindset of what they are is going to help you as you prepare your journey. So again, identity governance and administration, we have things like automated access certificate, things like continuous review, ongoing compliance. We have things like RBAC and ABAC and so on, knowing how it works and how it is implemented. That is why, again, zero trust is coming in as a modern form of security, which, of course, is a deviation from a traditional security system. And again, traditional security system deals more heavily with the use of things like firewalls and so on, IDS, to be able to secure their parameter. But again, if you have been a traditional type of person and you are shifting gears to be modern or to be modernized, then the use of different policies become therefore absolute for you to succeed. Be able to understand things like, for example, identity-based policy, resource-based policy, what distinguish them, permission boundary, conditional access policies, all those things become a new replacement from, I would say, a firewall traditional security. Hey, I'm not saying that you don't use firewalls again because you have to use policies. That is not what I'm trying to say. Therefore, just to give you a mental comparison from a shift of traditional security and how modern security, especially in the cloud, how they look at things, how they think security, and so on, not through just technology, but through the different implementation strategy. So again, all this information, you must actually arm yourself before again preparing for that market or that specialization. So again, a developer focused mentality. Of course, we talk about things like identity as a service platform. We talk about API security. And again, we talk about things like the CI/CD, pipeline integration, and so on. So again, nowadays, modern applications, they actually run on cloud environment. And authentication here becomes a very major part of it right here. And of course, I am such a fan of the CI/CD pipeline, especially when it comes to talking about security. And you see, sometimes you might be an identity and access management engineer, and one of the struggle you will go through it is for you to be able to assess the identity. Let's say you have an organization whereby you have more than 500 identities that are there. So how are you going to assess them? Well, I know that again, you might use cloud native tools to be able to assess them and so on. But a better strategy, again, is for you to understand you can actually stop all those things even within the CI/CD pipeline before it ever gets further, right? Especially if you have to deploy some of those identities using things like infrastructure as a code, such as Terraform. So again, it becomes more preventive, of course, not with having to push that code to create those identities if they don't meet a certain requirement before we start talking about detective and we start talking about monitoring. So again, within the CI/CD pipeline, identity and access management may come in under three different phases. Number one, preventive, making sure that the code that is being written or your Terraform files that have been written to create your identity actually meet a certain requirement and so on. You can actually run even manual security check right there to be able to see if those codes have been well written, or you can actually write them in the form of a script to automate them right there. So again, these are some of those things that you need to understand. The second way of looking at it, maybe from a CI/CD pipeline perspective, is what I call detective controls in place. So again, detective controls, whether from the pipeline perspective or you want to enable that within cloud itself, or you want to use other third-party tools, again, it becomes very, very necessary for you to have that mindset and that understanding. And lastly, we can talk about monitoring, because the greatest nightmare that companies face or you meet again is how to be able to monitor again access within your environment. Again, when I say within an environment, remember that we are living in an era where remote jobs are very, very big, are becoming the standards. Some people are going to be working remotely, some people are going to be on-prem, and again, trying to manage access for those that are being stored in the cloud and also on-prem is another issue right there. So again, you have to develop such a mindset. But the fact that you are specializing in identity and access management does not mean that, hey, you will say, I don't have anything to do with DevOps. Yes, I encourage you to study as much as you can study, but make sure that you keep focus on your specialization, microservice identity, and so on. So again, there are so many things to talk about this identity and access management. And again, career path. Which career path can you actually choose? Well, again, there's a junior IAM. We have things that I am engineer, senior architect, or I am director. Again, there is no standardized job title to say you are going to see it. Why? Because different companies, they might have different way of looking at again, things or naming at the jobs right there. So again, let's look at what I call career trajectory. So for a junior identity and access management analyst, again, maybe understanding things like operation, basic configuration, user provisioning is also important. And those may take you between maybe 1 to 3 years, because during that year, you'll be struggling to learn about the technologies that we just mentioned right there. So from the third year to the seventh year, then you'll be learning about maybe solution design, implementation, integration, how integration actually works. So by the moment you rise to the rank of a senior IAM architect, which might be between 7 to 10 years, so you are very good at strategic planning, complex integration, architecture, and so on. And in this case, therefore, it is very common that you are working with an organization whereby they need a complex planning or implementation of zero trust or IAM solution if they're actually using different cloud environment. And of course, again, let's say they are using 3 different clouds. So what are you going to do? So you have to think strategically and so on, not just at the level of implementation, as I said again, at the level of detection and at the level of monitoring, how those access or requirement, they have to be kept at all time. It's one thing for you to be able to provision the access. And it's one thing for you to be able to keep your eyes on those access so that they don't slip away right there. So again, we have IR, director, and so on, which might take about 10 years and up. So again, at this particular level of leadership, program management, executive strategist, then you have mastered enough skills that with that skill, you can actually use to be able to implement that at the level of organization. You are no longer talking about just implementing that on a system, but now you can implement that at the level of the organization and so on. So again, coupling to being an identity and access management engineer, one of those things that we always come under that bracket is going to be cloud security engineer. Now, remember, when you talk about cloud security engineer, it can be broad and it can be vague at the same time, because different companies, they have different way of interpreting what cloud security engineering is all about. You can be a cloud security engineer, but your major is focused on identity and access management. Another person can be a cloud security engineer, but he has a specialization that he is focused right there. And perhaps that is why you see when it comes to things like certification, you're going to see there are certain certifications that deal like solution architect. And from solution architect, they have one that is specialized on networking, one that is specialized on security, one that is specialized on analytics, just to mention a few. Why? Because this knowledge is very, very important. So again, cloud, you can be a cloud security engineer, but all what you do is just based on identity and access management. And of course, you can use that same skill and be a DevSecOps engineer. A DevSecOps engineer doesn't mean that you just simply have to be a developer. Yes, have the mindset of a developer, but again, how security can be implemented right there within the CI/CD pipeline. And of course, again, security right here, don't just think about automation, because generally when we talk about the CI/CD pipeline, we might just be thinking about automation, but no, it doesn't really begin right there. It begins at the level of planning. So, at the stage of planning, how do you and factor security right there? So, again, that is when you think about your skills in threat modeling. Right there, that's when you actually can integrate your OWASP top 10. That is when you can think the risk assessment, security assessment, and so on before you can even move further. So, again, you need to wear so many or different hats for you to be able to effectively incarnate. I don't know if that's the right word right here, embody the other roles right there. Because if you are a successful identity and access management engineer, there is nothing that stops you from either being a good cloud security engineer or a good DevSecOps engineer, because they intersect at one point. We have security architect, enterprise-wide security design. So again, be with the experience more than 10 years, you should be able to look an organization. You should be able to know what goes where. You should be able to design security and so on from every perspective, whether networking and how it authentication works. So you should be able to look at it all round. Again, there are people who can just specialize in GRC specialists, governance, risk, and compliance. That is another area right there, again, where you can actually be focused right there. As a matter of fact, most the implementation of identity and access management solution, they are actually mandated by certain compliances. They have to meet certain requirement right there. It is mandatory. It's not optional right there. And they will give you even the specialization or specificity of what needs to or how it needs to be implemented. So again, don't limit yourself. Don't only think about SOC because maybe you are about to graduate from the university and all what you have been told is just about SOC because that is what your friends are telling you. No, there is a lot out there to conquer. Okay, there's a lot out there to conquer. So again, the goal of this presentation is just to help somebody out there so that you can put the skills that you have learned together. Some of the skills that I've spoken right here, you must have learned them in school, in college, but you don't know how to package yourself. So I just hope that this presentation is going to help you package yourself together and know how to make yourself valuable. And of course, there are some valuable certifications out there in the market. If you focus on identity and access management engineer, we have things like the CISSP, which is the golden mine in cybersecurity, top-notch certification, right? We have things like the CISM, and so on, certified information security manager. We have things like the Okta certification. Okta has so many, or the Okta professional or at the consultant level. Again, they have different certifications, cell point certification, and so on. Identity IQ engineer. So again, there are different certifications, and these certifications are also good to give you a very good understanding of what the industry is, and so on. So, a part of this other certification, we have very powerful certifications from different cloud providers, such as one, AWS Certified Security Engineer or Specialty. We also have Azure Security Engineer Associate. We have Google Professional Cloud Security Engineer. And we also have Cyber Act Certified Delivery, of course, Engineer. So, again, these are very powerful certification right here in the market. So again, we have so many opportunities out there. So once again, I want to welcome you if you're just joining my channel or you are just listening to me for the first time. Of course, I hope that this cybersecurity presentation was able to help you. And of course, if you have any question, then always feel free to send a message and of course contact us. We'll be able to have some good discussion. Nobody knows it all, but again, we all learn in parts. So once again, I welcome you and I hope that this 1 hour session was actually a was beneficial to you. And of course, by God's willing, I'm going to be bringing forth many of such recordings or video so that it can help so many people out there who are actually struggling. That being said, have a wonderful evening wherever you are listening to me.